the shadows in the wall. The first scream tore through the house before the door even fully closed behind her. Tara froze. For a heartbeat, she was unsure whether it had come from inside or outside. The wind was howling through the trees outside, but this was different. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't nature. This was a cry, guttural and primal, sharp with pain and desperation. She didn't want to go in. She didn't want to be here. But there she was, standing in the hallway of a place that had been empty for over a decade. Tara had come to the house to settle an inheritance dispute, nothing more. It was a simple matter of paperwork, but her cousin Rebecca had insisted that she see the place, as if it were some grand tradition. Her pouch of money, the house, no, the mansion, loomed in front of her now, dark and foreboding, like a creature that had been waiting for her return. The walls were thick with the scent of mildew and something far worse. Decay. Death. A cold draft curled through the air, whispering across her skin like a warning. This place was wrong. Her boots scraped against the wooden floor as she stepped further inside. The silence after that scream, almost unbearable. The silence felt like something watching her, waiting. She heard the faintest shuffle of feet behind her, and then a voice, soft, barely a whisper, but somehow impossibly close. "Don't go upstairs." Tara's heart skipped a beat. The voice was nothing like the scream from before. This was calm, almost sweet, but it held an edge of something old and broken. She spun around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. Her breath caught in her throat, and her eyes darted over every shadow, every corner of the darkened space. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling even though she hated herself for showing fear. The words hung in the air, and the house seemed to swallow them whole. There was no answer. But then the whispering started again. It was coming from the walls. Tara could hear it, faint but unmistakable, a murmured chant, like a prayer, but twisted and wrong. It seemed to travel through the very air itself, vibrating in her bones, sinking deep into her thoughts. A chill ran down her spine. She backed toward the front door, desperate to leave, but when her hand brushed the handle, the door didn't open. She pulled again, harder, but the door was stuck, as if it had fused to the frame. Something was holding it shut. Burgess could feel the sting of it on her cheek and tried to step back from it. Something was holding it shut. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Now a chorus of voices layered over one another, so many that it was impossible to understand them. They were speaking directly to her. "Stay with us, Tara." The voices were almost pleading now, and Tara could feel her stomach twist. She backed away from the door, her feet stumbling against the floor as she turned toward the staircase that loomed ahead. The very sight of it made her blood run cold. It was old, ancient even. The steps seemed to stretch up into infinity, disappearing into the blackness above. She didn't want to go up there. She didn't want to follow whatever was calling her. But the air inside the house felt thick, pressing against her lungs, and the only way to escape this oppressive silence, to escape the whispers, was to move forward. Tara reached out and touched the banister. It was colder than ice. Her fingers curled around it instinctively, as if it were guiding her. She didn't know why, but it felt like the only thing keeping her steady, the only thing that didn't feel as though it might swallow her whole. The stairs creaked under her weight, the sound too loud in the silence of the house. Each step felt heavier than the last. The whispering followed her, the voices seeping through the walls, thick with malice and sorrow. "Tara, Tara, come to us." The voice was unmistakably hers now, soft, seductive, calling her name. beckoning her further. "Don't listen." The sudden, sharp warning sent a tremor through her body. Tara spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. At the top of the staircase, in the shadows of the upper floor, a figure stood, tall, pale, and completely still. "Don't listen to them." The voice was low and broken, full of pain. Tara could barely see the figure, but she felt the weight of its presence, like a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Who are you?" Tara gasped, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure didn't move, but the shadows seemed to reach out toward her, stretching along the walls. The whispering grew louder, as if dozens of people were speaking at once, and the air around her grew colder. "Leave this house." Tara took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. I can't leave. The door, it's stuck. Please, what do you want from me?" The figure didn't answer, but its shape grew clearer, more defined. It wasn't just the shadows that formed it. There were eyes, hollow and black, staring at her from the darkness. The figure's face twisted, its mouth opening in a grotesque smile that sent a wave of nausea through her. And then it spoke, its voice like a death rattle. "You belong here now." Tara's breath hitched as the figure began to move, gliding down the stairs toward her with unnatural speed. She bolted. She didn't even think, just ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from that thing, away from whatever it was that had been calling her, whispering in the walls. Her legs felt like lead, and the walls seemed to close in around her as she ran down the hallway. But when she reached the end, she realized she was standing in front of a door she had never seen before. It was a door she hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, she yanked it open. Inside was a room covered in dust, but as soon as she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her. And then she heard it, the whispering coming from the walls. "You can't escape." The words were colder now, sharper. Tara stumbled backward, her back pressing against the wall as the door in front of her began to twist, the wood splintering and shifting, as if something was trying to break through. The shadow from the stairs was here now. It was in the room with her. And it was smiling at her sanity. "You can't escape," they hissed in unison. Tara could feel their cold fingers brushing against her skin, pulling her deeper into the darkness like invisible threads weaving her into the very fabric of the house. Her legs felt like jelly, her stomach a twisting knot of fear. But there was no time to think, no time to plan. The door, the one she'd just slammed shut, was already beginning to deform. The wood twisted and warped as if it were alive, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. A dark shape pushed against the door from the other side, its outline distorted as though the door itself was struggling to contain it. The whispering was louder now, louder than her own heartbeat. Tara screamed, her voice raw and desperate, but it was swallowed by the oppressive sound that surrounded her. "Tara? Tara." The voice was familiar now, her own voice. It was coming from all around her, inside her mind, in the very air she breathed. "Oh, leave me alone!" Tara shouted, her voice trembling as she pushed herself away from the door. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The house was alive, and it was feeding on her fear. The shadows in the room thickened, curling like serpents, wrapping around her legs, pulling at her clothes, urging her to fall deeper into the darkness. And then, the laughter. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but it carried an edge of something darker, something malevolent. Tara turned, her eyes desperately scanning the room. A figure stood in the far corner, draped in darkness, but its eyes, those black, hollow eyes, shone through the shadows. Tara's pulse quickened as she recognized the figure. It was hell. The figure grinned, and the smile stretched impossibly wide, far beyond what a human mouth should be able to do. It was grotesque, a mocking mirror of Tara's own features, but twisted into something unrecognizable. "You've always known, haven't you?" the figure whispered. Tara could feel the words sinking deep into her bones. "You've always known that you were meant to be here." "No," Tara gasped, stumbling backward. "I don't belong here, I don't—" The figure stepped forward, its movement jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with broken strings. Its skin stretched, pulled tight against its bones, as if it were wearing someone else's flesh. "Oh, but you do," it crooned, its voice soft and insidious, like honey laced with poison. "The house has waited for you, Tara. It has always waited." The walls trembled. The shadows thickened, gathering around her, swirling like a storm. Tara stumbled back further, her hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. But the moment her fingers touched it, the wood beneath her hand grew hot, then searing. "Let go!" she screamed, jerking her hand away, but the pain lingered, the skin on her fingers raw and blistering. "You can't escape," the figure hissed, its voice dripping with satisfaction. "We won't let you." Tara's breath was ragged, her chest tight with panic. She had to get out. There had to be a way. She glanced around the room, eyes desperately searching for a door, a window, anything. But the room was barren, save for the suffocating darkness that seemed to press in from every corner. Their reflection continued to move closer, its grin widening, revealing a mouth full of jagged, needle-like teeth. Tara's heart hammered in her chest as she backed away, only to stumble into something behind her. The air around her suddenly thickened, the temperature dropping so quickly that her breath came out in visible puffs. A presence was behind her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she spun around. There was something else. A figure, shrouded in shadow, moved toward her with a slow, deliberate pace. It was tall, almost too tall, its limbs impossibly long, its features blurred by the darkness that surrounded it. Tara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the looming figure. It was watching her. "Please, please don't," Tara whispered, her voice a broken plea. But the figure didn't answer. It simply raised a hand, long, thin fingers curling toward her like claws. Away. And then, the walls seemed to pulse. Tara's head spun as the shadows in the room thickened, becoming alive, crawling, slithering, the air growing heavier and colder. The temperature dropped so fast that her skin prickled with goosebumps, and she could see her own breath clouding in front of her. "It's too late," the figure rasped in a voice that echoed deep in her mind. "The house has claimed you." The walls closed in on her. Tara backed away, heart hammering, mind whirling. She was trapped. The house was feeding on her. It had been waiting for her, for years, for decades. It had been waiting for someone to step through its cursed threshold, someone like her. Tara could feel the weight of its hunger, the pressure of its dark energy closing around her, consuming her. "No!" she screamed, shaking her head, but the figure was already too close. The darkness around her seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, as if the house itself was breathing. Tara's skin crawled, the very air thick with dread. Her legs gave out from beneath her, and she crumpled to the floor, her body shaking with fear. But then, just as she thought the darkness would swallow her whole, the figure stopped. It was no longer standing. It was crouched down beside her, its face just inches from hers. Tara could feel the coldness of its breath against her skin, its hollow eyes boring into hers. "Do you want to know why you're here?" the figure whispered. "Do you want to understand why you've come back?" Tara's lips parted, but no sound came out. She could barely think. Her mind was clouded with fear, confusion, The overwhelming pressure of the house's presence. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything was closing in on her. And then, the figure reached out, its long, bony fingers brushing against her forehead. The moment it touched her skin, her vision blurred, and the room around her seemed to distort. She saw it. A flash, a memory. The house in flames, her mother's face, twisted in agony, her father's final, desperate scream. The house had consumed them, just like it had consumed so many before them. The house was alive, feeding on the souls of those who entered. Tara gasped, her breath catching in her throat. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had been waiting for her all along. She was the final piece, the one who would bring the house's hunger to its full, terrible climax. The figure leaned closer, its grin widening into something grotesque, its breath hot and foul against her face. "It's time," it whispered,